Ogun, the Yoruba god of iron and war, was the fiercest warrior among all the orishas, the one who cut the first path through the tangled wilderness so the other gods could even reach the newly made earth. But after leading the kingdom of Ire to a hard-won victory in battle, his battle fury hadn't fully cooled by the time he reached home. A simple misunderstanding on the road, and the same rage that had just won a war turned on his own celebrating people. This is a story still told across Yoruba communities in West Africa and carried into the diaspora traditions of Brazil, Cuba, and Haiti, where Ogun remains one of the most revered and feared orishas of all. It's a myth about the razor's edge between the violence that protects and the violence that destroys, and about a god so honorable that when he crossed that edge, he chose exile over forgiveness. Here's what happened the day Ogun's fury outlasted the battle it was meant for. In Yoruba tradition, Ogun was the first orisha to descend from the heavens to the raw, unformed earth, and he found it choked with primordial forest, utterly impassable. While the other gods hesitated, Ogun forged himself an iron cutlass, the very first iron tool or weapon to exist in creation, and hacked a road through the wilderness with his own hands, clearing the path every other orisha would later walk. For this, he is remembered as a pioneer, a clearer of ways, patron of blacksmiths, hunters, soldiers, and, in the modern world, his myths could never have predicted mechanics, truck drivers, and anyone whose work depends on iron and machinery. Ogun's power was immense and genuinely terrifying even to the other gods. In battle, he entered a state the Yoruba call a kind of divine war trance, a fury so complete that he became nearly unstoppable, cutting down enemies with a speed and violence no mortal or god could match. But that same fury was a blade with no handle. Ogun himself knew this about his own nature, and it weighed on him. Eventually, exhausted by centuries of war and the endless demands of kingship over the city of Iri, Ogun laid down his crown and withdrew from ruling entirely, retreating to live alone as a humble farmer and hunter, tending his own plot of land far from palace politics, a god who had grown to distrust the very fury that made him great. Peace did not last. Enemy armies gathered on the borders of Ire, and the kingdom's forces, without their greatest warrior, began to falter. The elders and chiefs of Ire, desperate, sought out Ogun in his self-imposed exile and begged him to return just once more, not as king, only as their war leader, to save the people who still depended on him. Ogun refused at first. He had left war behind for a reason he couldn't fully explain even to himself, a wariness of his own nature that no one else seemed to share. But when messengers described children and elders in the villages nearest the border already fleeing before the advancing enemy, his old sense of duty overrode his caution. He rose from his farm, took up the iron weapons he'd set aside, and dressed once more in the palm-frond regalia of a warrior orisha. The people of Ire welcomed him back with genuine relief and celebration even before the battle was fought. Their legendary defender returned. Ogun marched at the head of Ire's army toward the enemy lines, and as the fighting began, the war trance the old stories warned about took hold of him completely. His iron blade moved faster than sight, and the enemy broke and scattered before him within hours. It was, by every account, a total and overwhelming victory. Word of the triumph reached Ire's capital before Ogun himself did, and the city erupted in celebration. Drummers filled the streets and preparations began at once for a feast worthy of the god who had saved them, the finest food the kingdom could offer, and vessels of fresh palm wine set out along the road home to honor him as he marched back in triumph. But the war trance that had won the battle had not lifted from Ogun. It rarely dispersed quickly, even under ordinary circumstances, and the fighting had been brutal and prolonged. He walked the road home, still half lost in the singular narrowed focus of battle fury, alert to threat, deaf to nuance, his senses still tuned to combat rather than homecoming. At the roadside stops his own people had prepared for him, Ogun drank the palm wine offered in his honor, again and again, at every village along the route, a gesture of gratitude that, combined with a mind still gripped by war fury, only deepened the fog he was walking through rather than helping him settle back into peace. By the time he was close to home, he was no longer entirely present in the world around him. Still a weapon, not yet a man again. Near the very last stretch of road before Ayer's gates, a cluster of farmers and travelers, his own people, ordinary villagers going about an ordinary afternoon, spotted the returning hero and called out to him in celebration, shouting his name and cheering. But between the wine, the lingering war trance, and the ordinary chaos of overlapping voices in a local dialect, what reached Ogun's fogged senses did not register as welcome. It registered, in the one narrow channel his fury still recognized, as hostility, as mockery, as a threat closing in from every side. The same fury that had just annihilated an invading army turned, without pause or recognition, on the unarmed people standing in front of him. Ogun drew his iron blade and cut through the crowd exactly as he had cut through the enemy line hours before, with total indiscriminate lethal force. It was over in moments. By the time the war trance finally broke and true awareness flooded back into him, he was standing amid the bodies of his own subjects, farmers and travelers who had done nothing but come out to celebrate his return, his iron sword still dripping with the blood of the very people he had marched out to protect. Ogun's grief and horror at what he had done were, by every account, as total and overwhelming as his battle fury had been. He did not try to explain it away, did not claim confusion or blame the wine. He simply understood, with total clarity now that the fury had lifted, that he had broken the one line a protector must never cross, and that no apology could undo it. He declared to what remained of his shocked people that he was no longer fit to rule over them or to live among mortals at all. That a god whose fury could not tell friend from enemy had forfeited the right to either a crown or a home among the living. Then, in front of the survivors, Ogun drove his iron sword deep into the earth of the road where the killing had happened, and, refusing to be persuaded otherwise, sank down into the ground after it, disappearing beneath the surface of the earth entirely, vanishing from the world of men. He has never fully returned, but he never disappeared from Yoruba life either. Today, blacksmiths light forges in his name, hunters invoke him before entering the bush, and across Nigeria, Brazil, Cuba, and Haiti, mechanics and truck drivers still pour a little palm wine or oil to Ogun before dangerous work with iron and engines, asking the god who once lost control of his own fury to keep theirs steady instead.